And we are back. We are the coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, again, broadcasting live at the Go Local Media Center at 90 Way Boston Street, here in the heart of the city we love, the mean streets of Providence, the naked city where there are thousands and thousands of stories. A little background. I am the chairman of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party. If there is a publication of record for libertarian political thought, and one that articulates a common sense, clear, cogent analysis of the political events of the day, minus the outrage porn, minus the Breitbart influence, minus the fake news, minus any one of the cliches that people would promote or place on media. It is in fact Reason Magazine, a publication of some note. You can find it on the web. All original content at reason.com. Recently, Matt Welch, who you've seen on CNBC, CNN, MSNBC, HBO, any one of the number of talking head shows, joined us here in Providence as the keynote speaker for the Rhode Island Libertarian Party Annual Convention. If you missed it, it's a shame because he and our other speakers, Arvin Vore and Larry Sharp, were funny, incisive, sharp, just a wonderful analysis of politics today. Joining me on the line, and I think are you on the streets of New York? It sounds like is Professor Ed Krayewski. He is from he is an editor at Reason.com, and he is also a professor at Seton Hall University in the Hall of Communications. He has attended Columbia University. He has attended, as well as, I believe, if I'm getting this all right, you also got a master's at Seton Hall University, correct?
Yes.
All right, super. So, first of all, thank you for taking time from your Friday night to join us here in Providence, where we're going to attempt to continue to introduce the thoughts of liberty, if you will, to one of America's bluest states. So, welcome for the first time for the coalition.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be on the show. Going to be in Providence for the first time in a couple of months, so I'm excited.
And so this is a pretty cool place to hang out, despite its politics. So give us a little background. How did you arrive as a libertarian, and how did you arrive at Reason Magazine? And I should say small L libertarian, correct?
Yeah, I guess it's a kind of a long story, but so I grew up and was raised in Newark, New Jersey, which, like Providence, is a very democratic city. So when I was 18, I registered as a Democrat, and before I was even 18, I was working in like Democratic machine politics and get out the vote, things like that. And as I read more, I think the first book that really made me question whether there's this like philosophy that actually fits better with what I believe than what I've been able to map out myself was Memoirs of a Superfluous Man by Alfred J. Nock. Alfred J. Nock. And I would recommend that to any reader. It's a fun book by a guy from like the first half of the 20th century, and just his experiences in the world in such a state of change at the time. This was written, I think, between World War I and World War II. And he really captures that. And most importantly, captures the role of the individual in that, and how, there's this long battle. We think, you might plug into politics in the last year, 5 years, 10 years, you might think this is all new, that this assault on our liberties and our rights and our freedoms to be people is a new thing, but it's not, it's a 100-year-old project. So that really got me in, and then what really got me into libertarianism, and I think this is a story for a lot of people in this generation, is Ron Paul. I fell in love with Ron Paul when I watched the first of the Fox debate for the Republican primary in 2007, or maybe it was even in 2006, because they started those debates early. And he had a line, and I remember the specific line was about that the most harmful tax is inflation, because that's money out of your wallet without you even having to hand it over, right? That's the Federal Reserve devaluing your currency. And that made a lot of sense. And I dug into that, and just almost everything you were saying was making a lot of sense to me, and I didn't understand, everything I grew up to believe in, why this route of individual freedom wasn't the way wasn't the way to go. So I was still registered Democrat. I switched to Republican to vote for Ron Paul, and then I switched back. I switched back after the election. I was frustrated. I think we were all frustrated. Everyone who's working on the Ron Paul campaign as volunteers in 2008 was frustrated. And then I found myself at Fox News, and I introduced myself at some point to Judge Andrew Napolitano, who's a great legal mind in the libertarian world. And I invited him on behalf of a friend to some rally, and he was like, he'd love to, but he had a scheduling commitment or whatever. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then about a year later, he reached out to me while I was still at Fox and said, I've got this new show called Freedom Watch, and I want real, true blue, true north libertarians. And I was like, I would love to do that. So I got transferred over to his show, worked on his show for a few years, and then Fox Business had some changes. They canceled their entire primetime lineup. I got laid off. And so I started sniffing around for stuff, and Reason actually reached out to me because they were creating a new news aggregation type thing, and I started reading about 5 years ago last month, and I love it. It's the best job I've had, and I've had a lot of jobs. It's also the longest job I've had. Hopefully, it'll keep me in that.
Right. Now, this week, and I guess, well, let's take a step back. Describe, if you will, the work environment at Reason. I mean, you seem to have mastered at the magazine this constant flow of fresh writing. It's writing at a very high level, yet at the same time, you folks manage to make it very accessible to the average reader. But how is it that you folks are able to generate on almost a daily basis reporting and writing which is right on target with the news cycle, yet at the same time answers questions a lot of us haven't even really thought of yet? How do you guys do that?
I mean, I think, I think I'd have to start off by saying we have amazing editors. So I definitely have to give credit, especially for my own work, to editors. But I think it's because libertarians are not plugged in to the tribalist, partisan, day-to-day politics. And they also have a keen understanding that the politics will always follow the culture. And I think what makes Reason special is that it's very tuned in to the cultural moment. And so I think we're able to borrow a phrase from everyone's favorite former speaker, Nancy Pelosi. When she said that line about you have to pass it to see what's in it,
right.
It was a ridiculous line, but that second part was, outside of the fog of politics. And I think that's the trick with Reason, is that we approach all the policy issues and all the political issues outside the fog of politics, outside the fog of partisan politics. And so because of that, we're really able to focus in on the things that matter. A couple years ago, there was that front page New York Times Magazine cover story about the libertarian moment,
Right.
And then, Rand Paul kind of flaked out, didn't really get as much done as some people thought, but it very much still is the libertarian moment. The progress on ending the drug war is unmistakable, even with the step back of Jeff Sessions' Department of Justice. Gay marriage is an incredible process. Libertarians were there for 30, 40 years.
Right.
And even on other things, even on distrust of government, on the belief in the individual, we're on, I don't know, I guess everyone who's believes in some instances, but it feels like we're on the right side. And things are going our way, and even in these, quote unquote, dark moments, when all these Democrats all of a sudden are realizing what kind of system they live in, we've been here all the time.
Right.
We've been warning about Trump before Trump was Trump, and we'll be warning about Trump after Trump's gone, and people are on to the next shiny thing. Insisting that it's totally different. I think that's what's most fun about being a libertarian these days is that it's just all so funny. It's all just so funny. It's just why, people have just woken up and it's just like we've been talking about government abuse issues for going on 40, 50 years. And Reason alone is 40, almost 50 years old. It'll be 50 next year. Right. 50th anniversary. And, it's refreshing to finally see other people concerned with the same things we are. Ever since I was at Boston and Freedom Watch, I've been covering police abuse and police reform issues. And then summer of 2014 with furry days and the laptop became into the national dialogue. But we've been there, before I was at Reason, Bradley Dawson was the Washington Post. Now he's been covering it for years. So police reform is an issue that's been important in libertarians for decades. And now everyone's on board. And they want to, sometimes they want to lecture us because we're outside the political mainstream. But I think it's important for libertarians to be like, no, we're not going to be lectured because there's nothing to lecture us about.
Right. Yeah, I think I often talk about this romantic concept that a compact exists in which exchange for our tax dollars, the interjection of government into our daily lives will somehow introduce a measure of justice, equality, and fairness. Do you think folks have finally woken up to the big lie that represents?
I think so, and I think that's because, the technology makes it impossible not to. And this is where, no matter how dark it gets, I always point out that the technology and the inventive technology is in our favor. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that I teach at Seton University. I teach journalism. And last year, I taught a couple semesters of the history of American journalism. And you can't, it's impossible to exaggerate the influence that the printing press had on the development of human society. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing with the internet is a second iteration of that. And as it makes it easier for us to find people who believe the same things we do, and more importantly, getting our message out to more and more people, these ideas, they can't be beaten, Everyone, nobody likes, a lot of people don't like to hear it. Everyone's a capitalist. I'm living and everyone's a capitalist. That's why capitalism works, right? It works with who we are as people and not who we pretend to be, right? Because we all go out, even in our everyday lives, we go around and sometimes we pretend to be something that we're not. Mm-hmm. And I think capitalism works because it accepts us for who we are and allows us to be as free as possible to do what we want. And in the aggregate, that makes everything better.
Right.
Undeniably, free markets have lifted billions of people out of poverty, more than any other force in human history. And no matter how brainwashed someone might be, those are facts on the ground that are impossible to ignore. And so whether or not, like I said, the politics follows the culture. People are going to start using Bitcoin. Venezuela, Bitcoin's huge, and we covered that. And it's huge because people have lost faith in the government. They've lost faith in government-controlled industry. 3D printing. They're going to stop 3D printing. The whole gun control debate is only 20 years at most, I'd say, from being just totally irrelevant because you can be able to print whatever you want at home. So all these technologies, even encryption, all this stuff works toward decreasing the influence and power that government can project, right, and making it more costly for government to project. And make it more costly for government to project that power.
Right.
And I think that's important, and particularly now in the last year or two, when leaks, the last 4 or 5 years, I guess, when leaks have really entered into the mainstream political discussion, is that what leaks do, what leaking does, what WikiLeaks is doing, Snowden is doing, they're increasing the cost of secret government. And the more it costs for government to keep secret, the harder it's going to be for government to keep secret. And the harder it is for government to keep secret, the harder it is for government to maintain this fiction that they're doing something for us. And so people are going to wake up, and it may take a couple generations. I have so much faith in this post-millennial generation coming up because they're living in this world that's more free than it's ever been before. And I think they understand that in a deep sense. So I'm very excited for the future, very optimistic. So libertarianism is where we're going to end up. And it may take some time for us to get there, but it works because it works with who we are, and it works with who we are to unleash each of our own best potential and to create the best possible world. And I think it's impossible to deny that.
Folks, if you're just joining me on the coalition line, Professor Ed Krayewski, Seton Hall University, editor at Reason Magazine. Of course, you can find it at reason.com. We are, of course, the coalition on the Coalition Go Local Live Network. A powerful moment for me was a few weeks ago. For family reasons, I was at the Columbia University graduation, the main ceremony, when all 22 or so Columbia University colleges come together and perform this sort of this tradition-rich ceremony where each individual college gets up and asks the university president for permission to graduate.
Vaguely remember that.
Well, once I got past my daughter's college graduating, um, I was witness to the Columbia School of Journalism graduation. And it was a very simple moment, but eloquent at the same time. When their college president got up to speak to address the university president, 5 letters were flashed up, obviously planned, in very large font, and they were the letters TRUTH. At which point, of course, the crowd went nuts. Or as they say, the crowd went wild. And the journalism school president spoke simply without naming names or without without degrading the ceremony, but spoke eloquently to the necessity for more than ever for there to exist an independent media. So moments like that could be hope when, despite all the economic challenges the media, individual members of the media face, and listen, when you work in media like we do here, boy, do you, we're on the bleeding edge of trying to make a go of it. I quite frankly, I'm very, very optimistic because I see the confluence of the libertarian rising, if you will, in conjunction with alternative media to be able to provide an opportunity to portray fundamental truths to the body politic. I think we're there. It's just a question of overcoming what I call a short attention span theater. And that's what I refer to as, Americans' relationship with the media. It's there, it's gaining traction, and so people worry about in the age of Trump what's going to happen. I think if anything else, the awakening that's taken place with respect to the underlying issues with Mr. Trump are probably going to enhance both the challenges and then ultimately the solutions. I think it's going to accelerate everything at breakneck speed. And I'm curious as to what the students at Seton Hall and Columbia, what's their attitudes towards indie media these days?
Well, what I tell my students is there's a lot of doom and gloom among old media, forces. So I've been often be very dejected about journalism because of what they've heard from others. And what I tell them, and I heard it too back in 2005, 2006 when I was at Columbia, and it turned out not to be true. And what I tell them is that anytime someone tells you that journalism is kind of mean, but whatever, I tell them, anytime someone tells you that journalism is dying, they're dying, and they're confusing their death and their mortality with the industry. The industry is changing, yes, but it's not dying. New media is a great force, because it opens up the market of media. That's good. You want to get rid of the gatekeepers. Does that mean you're going to have problems with quote-unquote fake news? Sure. But if you look at the history of journalism, you've always had these problems. So if anything, it's easier today than ever before to identify fake news. We always miss that part.
Right.
So whether it's an alternative media source, whether it's a conspiracy source, whether it's a mainstream media source, if it says something that's not true, or something that turns out not to be true, people will figure that out. And I think in the long run, that's going to improve the media environment. I think we're seeing that. There's a lot of creative destruction going on, and not every step is going to be a step forward, but every step is in the correct direction. So I think I'm very excited about new media. I'm excited about things like YouTube. I'm excited about things like Twitter. I'm excited about things that democratize media, that free media, and that make it more free, and make it easier for people to answer, easier for people to practice journalism themselves. We got to stop thinking about people as journalists. Someone told me for a long time, don't describe yourself as this. Don't say you're a writer. Don't say you're a journalist. Because what does that mean? You can say you write. You can say you practice journalism. And I think all this new technology, all this new media is helping make that possible, while at the same time undermining the idea, that to be a journalist is something that requires special entry and special access. I had to go to Columbia. I had to pay a lot of money for a master's degree. And at the end of the day, it was just a piece of paper that got me to the door at NBC. And then being at NBC got me to Fox. And then being at Fox got me to Reason, which got me to where I was. I would never say that it wasn't worth it because of that trajectory. But new media is making that trajectory harder and harder. It's making it easier and easier for other people to do without having to get that piece of paper to get in the door. And I think that's an amazing thing. I'm very excited about it.
Well, and ultimately, what we say here at the coalition, and I'll let individual listeners make their own out loud judgment call at home right now, is it's all about content. If you're good, you get to go on the air again another week. If you're crap, you go away. And it's the notion that fake media is new means people don't remember the section on yellow journalism that they took in high school talking about the 19th century. The notion.
Yeah, and that never went away. And that never went away. That wasn't just, that's the other thing. It wasn't just the 19th century. Things like Gulf of Tonkin in the 80s, even the 90s. There was so much Drudge Report. A lot of people don't remember this Drudge Report broke about a Krayewski story. Mm-hmm. Because Newsweek was sitting on it. So, this whole fake news thing is nothing new. But use the term. Trump is a master of cultural manipulation. And so he's pushed this term into national consciousness. But we've always had fake news. Fake news has always been a phenomenon. And never been a debilitating one, and it's not a debilitating one now. And the reaction to it might be debilitating. The solution to fake news for statists is always to control more of who gets to be a journalist. And I think reducing those gatekeepers, getting rid of those gatekeepers, is overall always going to be a good thing. Because I have faith in people. Liberals pretend they do, even conservatives sometimes pretend they do. But really, unless you allow someone to be who it is that they want to be, and allow them to be a free person, you can't look at me and tell me you actually believe in people, right? If you always think that you have to control, and whether it's for liberals, you got to tell them how to live economically. They got to get a license for this, they got to get a subsidy for that. Or they're a conservative and you say, well, you can't be with this person, you can't have this kind of lifestyle. Libertarians believe in the power of the individual. A lot of people use it in rhetoric, but libertarians actually believe it. And I think people on the inside actually believe it too, no matter how much they've been quote unquote brainwashed.
Right.
And that's why I'm always optimistic about individual freedom.
Right. And
I know that it's not to be taken for granted.
People talk about the corporatization of the media. They obviously forget people like Randall Hearst and the robber barons of the 19th century. Media has always gone through iterations and life cycles where large corporations have controlled it until such point as a technology evolved that again further democratized it. I mean, you had the printed paper, which was revolutionary in its time, from Gutenberg. All of a sudden, by the 19th century, large corporate robber barons owned a great deal of it. Then all of a sudden, you had the evolution of radio, and oh my God, the boundaries again were broken down. People forget that it was the fax machine that revolutionized and helped Tiananmen Square occur. The old rolled paper fax machine was how those folks communicated. And it seems almost quaint to reflect on that. But I want to get to a couple of stories you've written this week. We've got about 15 or 20 minutes left. First of all, explain to me how Biggie Smalls was quoted by a Montana Supreme Court justice. All right, please.
So the story is there was a guy who was selling meth, and we can say he was selling meth in order to say allegedly because he pled guilty. But here's the thing: he got federal charges and he got state charges. So the federal government charged him with distribution, and the state government charged him with distribution and possession. He objected. He said, this is double jeopardy. The state said, okay, we admit it. We shouldn't be charging you with distribution. Now, why did they? Who knows? But the state, fine, we won't. But possession is separate. So what he was doing, he was buying meth, and he was cutting off a little for himself. And so what the government was arguing is that the idea that you took a little bit for yourself that constituted a separate act from the act of purchasing for distribution. And that's a total fiction. That's a fiction that could be resolved by saying, well, I paid myself, right? I bought it from myself. And if it wasn't illegal business, you could have a bookkeeper that does that. That puts in how much you got and how much you owe the company or whatever.
Right.
And so they quoted the Biggie line, never get high on your own supply, because as proof or as anecdotal evidence, that's understood that a drug dealer is not supposed to use his own product. But, the truth is that all of the aberrations in the drug industry happen because it has prohibition imposed on it, because it's in a black market. If it wasn't for a black market, drug entrepreneurs would have access drug entrepreneurs would have access to accountants, they would have access to lawyers. Access to lawyers would reduce street violence. Access to accountants would take care of the quote unquote separate act thing because you're just buying it to sell and you sell to yourself. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was kind of silly, and I think it showed some of the reasons. Sorry, I'm outside, so there's a little bit of background noise. That's the police, I think. So maybe an ambulance called police. That's always better than police. Police usually have no reason for them. So, and I think it just shows, why is the federal government, the state government, why are they targeting the same person over a couple pounds of meth? It's ridiculous. The drug war is a huge failure, and in large part it's a failure, first of all, because you can't control people that way. And then it's become this awful monster because they just want to spin their wheel to make it seem like they're making progress. And the problem is that spinning that wheel is a meat grinder that's destroying lives and resources. And I think it was kind of captured in this case. And I thought the judges were wrong on the law. I think if I'm buying a bunch of something and you're trying to charge me for buying that, I don't feel better if it goes out to others or even for me, you charge me for the act of having it, right? So I think it's one of these legal fictions that they create to be able to double charge and overcharge. Overcharging is a huge problem. Prosecutors will overcharge, will throw as many charges as they can at a suspect, knowing that a lot of them won't hold up in court in order to gain leverage. They can get a plea deal and then have a few years, actually get them for a few years in prison without having to go through the trouble of trial. So that's not fair. You can't, if you know you don't have a case, you shouldn't be saying that you can make that case. And so I'm hoping that changes. But it was an unfortunate ruling by the Montana Supreme Court, I think, right. Despite the cutesy quoting the hip-hop lyrics.
It's probably the only time we're going to have a situation where the television show The Wire has anything in common with the Montana Supreme Court justice. Maybe a good friend of the show, Mark Wicks, is a little bit continues his success path in Montana, trying to reach the United States House of Representatives as a libertarian. Maybe we can challenge that. We've only got a few minutes left, but
50 years from now, the Supreme Court's gonna they're gonna be quoting memes. Everything's gonna be a meme form.
That's crazy.
I'm convinced we're just gonna have celebrity presidents from now on. Which I don't think is a bad thing. Trump's aside, I think it's fine. It breaks down this fiction that these politicians are somehow more qualified than somebody else to tell us what to do. No one's qualified to tell us what to do. They might elect The Rock, elect Oprah. Let's get rid of this fiction. Politicians know more than we do, and are going to have solutions to problems we can't come up with solutions for.
Well, every good teenage Republican has a picture of Ronnie Reagan. Where most teenagers, when I was a teenager, would have a picture of Farrah Fawcett. You've got right next to the Star Wars picture, you've got the picture of Ronald Reagan. And if you've ever seen a Ronald Reagan movie, then you know that truly anyone can become president. But the line of the year, I think, had to be when Matt Welch was on HBO, Bill Maher's show. One of the other castmates pointed out that we have now officially elected a low information voter president. Any quick thoughts? There was some. If you're a libertarian, the Fourth Amendment is a big part of your life, and for many of my Republican friends who truly believe that the Constitution begins and ends at the Second Amendment, there is actually a host of legal protections that are afforded to Americans in the Constitution, and I would always recommend that they avail themselves of magazines like Reason so they can explore them and learn about them. But this past week we had a negative ruling, if you will, from the Supreme Court. It's straightforward and complicated at the same point. You had police officers engaging in ultimately an illegal search, but yet somehow that search was not poisoned by the fruit, if you will. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think the important thing is for people to stop looking for solutions from above. I think that plugs in a lot of things because police spend so much time, and we want to blame cops for these things, and this is the point I make at Reason regularly on this police reform, police abuse issue, is that the police enforce the laws, that democratic institutions have decided they want to enforce. You know, so I look at a city like New York and they pretend Black Lives Matter and we care about police brutality, but then you want to vigorously enforce quality of life complaints. You know, somebody's going to grill in front of their home and that's a violation. There's a town in Alabama that wants kids who mow the lawn to go pay $100 business license fee that my colleague Eric Bohm wrote about. And it's just, we have to realize that liberals love to say that the government is just another word for things together. And libertarians love to laugh at that, right? It's kind of a ridiculous assertion. But in one way, it is true. All of these laws, the drug laws are there because people who pretend that they're against the drug law war and people who pretend to care about these things still want to feed to the government the authority to tell people what to do when what they're doing has nothing to do with anyone else's well-being. If you're not harming someone else, it's not your business. You know, and people say, oh, I understand, and I want police to be nicer, and I want the government to abuse people less, but then they'll be against something like Citizens United. How do you imagine free speech to work if you can't talk about the election 60 days before the election? It's ridiculous. You know, or the hate crime legislation is a great example of this, you know, and this is where being in a place like Reading that has this long history really comes in handy. You know, because now, in the last year or two, Louisiana, I think New York's thinking about it, a couple of Louisiana's done it. New York's thinking about it, a couple of other states are thinking about it, trying to get it done. They're trying to get these hate crime laws passed to protect police officers. So if you target a police officer for being a police officer, you can be charged with a hate crime. And all the people who are in favor of hate crime, well, this is not what we intended. We didn't intend for this to happen. But you know, you go look at a 1993 article from Jacob Stone, and it's exactly what he was warning about. That if you pass hate crime legislation, it's going to be used by the people in charge to silence people who are not in charge, right? And so it's intent doesn't matter, right? There's all these unintended consequences. It doesn't matter whether you intended something to happen or not. If you look at it and you think about what are the possible scenarios of what's going to happen, and you can say this is something that can happen and I don't really have a way to prevent it, except that that's not what I mean for it to happen, that's not good enough, right? And so we're seeing that again now with Citizens United, with this hate speech stuff. You know, hate speech is ridiculous. And they're like, oh, well, you know, only white men talk about free speech and hate speech being a part of free speech. Sure. But you know what? At the end of the day, if you pass hate speech laws, I will tell you exactly who will be least affected by that. Straight white men. You know, it's like the catcalling thing. Oh, everyone wants to ban catcalling. That's going to largely affect poor youth of color and men of color. No doubt about that. And that gets frustrating. That gets frustrating sometimes because there has been this brainwashing, this systematic miseducation of people where, you know, these things are important. They're important for the most vulnerable. Free speech is important because once we start creating exceptions to it, those exceptions will harm the powerless the most. And even if you can trick the powerless and trick the marginalized into thinking this is good for them, that's not going to be the case. You know, and I think now, in the current moment, hate crime legislation is a perfect example of that, because libertarians were warning that stuff was going to happen, and then it happened, and then it happened. And libertarians have always been right about that stuff. That's why I love Ron Paul, too, you know, after 9/11, after we went into Iraq, he said, you know, or before 9/11, after we went into Iraq, but before 9/11, he said, this is going to cause a huge terrorist attack. He said this in the late 90s, and he was right. Libertarians have an amazing track record. You know, Nick Gillespie and that much of his, Nick Gillespie's been since like the 90s, and you read some of his stuff from when he was first here, everything he's writing about is turning out to have happened. You know, I remember I was reading some random articles, because I was doing some research for some archive piece that I read, I think it was by Nick, it was about how TV was changing because there was going to be all these new outlets and all these new studios and all these new people working in it. And in the early 90s, you know, that was like dark times for television. It was like nothing on TV.
Right.
This Northern Exposure was like the most sophisticated show in the early 90s in television. And so it seemed like kind of a ridiculous proposition at the time, maybe for some people. But it was absolutely right. All this stuff done. Today we have the golden age, a new golden age of television. So these libertarians have an uncanny record of being correct. And I think that's because, stuff we were talking about earlier, is because we see things outside of the box of politics. Between that we understand that the politics follows the culture and not the other way around. And because we're not thinking, well, this has to be the answer because if this isn't the answer, then our values don't matter. You know, because for us, our values will matter as long as individual freedoms matter. and individual freedoms are always going to win. It's no matter how totalitarian the society, there's always a segment of the population that wants freedom and wants to tell other people about freedom, and freedom always wins. So I'd like to keep that record going. I think, you talk about Ronald Reagan, and I know he's a complicated figure, but one thing he said that I think was amazing was that anecdote about some Cuban that he met at the White House or something. And the Cuban said, what's amazing about America, no matter how bad it got where I was, we always knew there was America to go to, and it was America to escape. Now, certainly, my parents' experience, they came to this country in the 80s, escaped from Poland, which was communist at the time. And my dad had been trying to escape Poland since like the 50s. And there's always America to go to. And Reagan's point was, for Americans, we don't have that. We don't have another place we can say, well, things get bad here, we can go somewhere else. We are the bastion of freedom, and we have to take that seriously, And I read a lot about foreign policy, so I read a lot about the mistakes the U.S. has made and the bad things the U.S. has done. And I read about police reform, and I read about drug wars, and I read about civil liberties violations. So I read about a lot of things the U.S. government does bad, and the government sucks. But the country's good, and the ideas are good. And we have to keep defending them. The ideas of individual freedom, of liberty, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It sounds cliche, but these are values that matter, and they're not the same values everywhere. Some liberals are, Canada's nice. You know what the values in Canada are? Their life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is peace, order, and tranquility. That sounds good in theory, but I don't know a single American that would prefer peace, order, and tranquility to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not a single one. And also, good look like that. I think we live in an amazing country with an amazing culture of freedom, a culture of freedom that anyone can plug into, that immigrants have contributed to. My parents came from Poland. People come from all over the world because where they were coming from sucked. Where they were coming from was no good. So when we were kids, my parents never tried to take us to any Polish cultural events. They taught Polish, they knew basic Polish history, so I can speak Polish pretty fluently. But we never were taught to have pride in our cultural heritage. Because that country was so bad that my parents had to drop everything they had in their lives to go travel thousands of miles so that I could be an American. And I think we forget that, especially with the immigration debate. We forget that, for all the quote-unquote importing this and importing that, people come here to America because they want to come here, because this is a good place to be if you want to be a free person. And we have to hold on to that. We can't let people, every place is just a place. We have a culture of freedom. That culture is special. That makes us who we are. That sounds a little hokey, that sounds a little too stated, but I don't know. I believe that. I really do.
No, and I think you nailed it. Here locally, the latest hot button issue, and I call this outrage porn because that's what a lot of the leadership tried to play off of, is anti-panhandling.
Oh, the King Griffith?
Yeah. Now this is actually anti-panhandling laws, and anti-panhandling are being promoted for safety reasons, because people shouldn't be standing in the middle of the road, and because that's not safe. And you and I know the logical outcome of laws like that. They're used to squash political opposition. But what's most astonishing about it is that those laws aren't being promoted by liberal Democrats. In fact, they're being opposed by liberal Democrats. Those laws are being promoted by conservative Republicans. Staggering that in the United States in the year 2017, we wouldn't see that as a transparent attempt to repress political protest in the age of Trump. And that's the type of thing that frightens me, and that's why I'm a small L and a big L libertarian, because since I'm not a real journalist like you, I can overtly be more of an activist. But on that, we've only got a minute or two left. But where can we find your writings? Talk to me about where we can find you on Reason Magazine, on Twitter, and your blog.
Yeah, Reason.com, I'm Reason.com/people/Krayewski. But if you just go to Reason.com and just dive in, you'll read things you enjoy. And if you've got Twitter followers listening, I try to run a good Twitter account. My Twitter account, unfortunately, it's really long. It's Krayewski, and that's EDKRAYWSKI. And since I know Providence is a big art town, you got whiskey there, I actually do comics with my dad. If your listeners want to check that out, that's SKT.co. They're very libertarian, nitty-gritty comics. And the interesting thing is, I talked earlier about technology is making people freer. I do this on-demand printing, so I can print small print runs. This is something that 20 years ago would be impossible for me and my dad to do this kind of art project without having a significant financial backing. But now we can do it. We started with a little bit that we have, used Kickstarter to get money for the book, and we've basically been able to do this without any cost to us because the technology has gotten cheaper, because the technology has gotten easier. And so you see this in comics, you see this in every industry, everywhere in the world, and it's not going to change, right? As long as we push it, as long as we keep wanting to buy. And that's the amazing thing about free market. It's like we don't even have to all commit to be scientists. We don't have to all commit to be engineers to get this done. All we have to do is commit that we're going to keep buying smartphones as long as they keep making them better than they are now. And as long as we're willing to do that, as long as we're willing to work on 9 to 5, willing to do whatever it is that we do to earn money, and we're willing to spend that money on new technology will keep happening. That's amazing. That's never happened before.
Right.
Because we never had free markets before. We never let the peasants buy stuff before. And so that's why Europe, for 1,000 years, had no technological progress. But all of a sudden, you give people a couple of shekels and you tell them, you can spend this on whatever you want and you can earn more if you can do more. And all of a sudden, in a typical smartphone today, I read Steve Horner up in Canada, amazing libertarian thinker, if you haven't had him on the show yet. And, he wrote that, I think all the things that an iPhone can do in like 2009, so it's already like 8 years ago, all the things that an iPhone phone could do would cost you $1 million in products and services in 1992. Progressives missed that, They get worried about things like genetical engineering and elective surgeries for genetic problems that you're more likely to have certain diseases. Oh, because it's so expensive, so poor people can't get it. That's the thing, poor people want it. And so it's going to get cheaper, just like smartphones got cheaper, just like digital cameras got cheaper, just like computers, just like every single consumer product in history. If you allow people to buy it. But if you get worried, say, well, no one can buy it, so everyone can afford it, then no one has it. That's what's in the communism. That's what my parents tell me about Poland, about communism all the time. Is that that's the thing, that they decided that they were so upset with people who were richer than them that they thought it would be better if they were all poor and miserable together. And that's awful. That's really giving into the worst inside of masquerading as our better interests and our better spirits. And that's depressing. I think those forces are moving. And I think whatever the huge gains they were able to make in the 20th century are going to be wiped out by this new technology. Millennials, older millennials hate YouTube, hate things like YouTube, because YouTube is making people famous that they don't think deserve it. And I love it. I love nothing more than seeing someone and being like, I have no idea why this person is as famous as they are, but God bless this country and this system for allowing that to happen. For allowing someone that has something that's silly to me, but just because it's silly to me doesn't mean it's going to be a failure. Because as long as people like it, they're going to be into it, and it's going to be something that's going to be feasible. And if government stays out of the way, things are going to keep getting better and better.
Well, the way I try to explain it is, I truly believe that capitalism, in its free market form, is the mechanism by which individuals can realize their full human potential. And the reason for that is ultimately people are motivated by their own personal desires. Some can call that greed, others can call that profit. The ability to generate profit, or greed, is then passed on to others because investing in others' potential and others' innovation allows them to profit, or call it greed. But that innovation that's spawned by desire for your own personal benefit is the fire that's created the American economy and the American marketplace. And that is why people from around the world flock here, because they realize that it is only here in the United States that they have the opportunity to profit from their own skills, their own innovation, their own sweat equity, their own labor. And if we get back to that, well, maybe then, I'll close with these words, we can make America great again. Oh!
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that slogan. I don't like him, but I love his style.
Oh my God.
I can't deny that.
It's like he's a political driver's ed film. You're in the front passenger seat, you're about to crash, you can't move, you're horrified, but you're somehow oddly riveted. Professor, thank you so very, very much for joining us. I know your name is complex, so we will be posting, when we post the broadcast of this on YouTube, as a matter of fact, for your own information. You are going to be memorialized on YouTube later on this weekend. We will post all those links so folks can have an opportunity to follow you. You're a treasure. You're funny, you're articulate, and you're right on point. So God bless, and I know.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
I know we'll be together again. Thanks for joining us in our inaugural Coalition Radio 2.0 Reason Magazine segment. You and I are going to liberty the hell out of the people in Rhode Island, aren't we?
Great, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.